Welcome to Biology 101. We are entering into Chapter 2 or Unit 2, and this is going to be our chemistry unit. In this first section, we're going to talk about atoms forming molecules and how they're going to do that. So they're going to do it through different types of bonds. First off, everything's going to be made up of atoms. Atoms are going to be the smallest unit or bit of matter that are part of that element. So you have an element, which is a substance that can't be chemically broken down to any other substance. And then if you have one piece of that element, that will be your atom. So it's going to be the smallest unit of that element. Now with atomic structure, the nucleus, we're going to have protons and neutrons. And so those are what you're going to find there in the center. Protons are going to have a positive charge to them, and they're going to be 1 AMU in mass. So that stands for atomic mass unit. Also, you'll find neutrons there in the nucleus. The neutrons are going to be shown in this picture in blue, and they also have mass. So they'll be 1 AMU in mass as well. They do not have a charge, however. They are going to be neutral in charge. So center, you have the nucleus, and that's going to make up all of the mass of that atom, protons and neutrons. Going around the center of the atom in its own orbitals or electron shells, you're going to find the electrons. Electrons do have mass, but it's very little. So you don't have to add that in to the atomic mass, so it's going to be negligible. So you would say an electron had 0 AMU. Looking at the different parts of the element on the periodic table, this is an example of one carbon. You'll see that it has an atomic number. That's going to tell you how many protons are going to be found in that element. But it not only tells number of protons, it will also tell you number of electrons that are going to be found there. And that's going to be important up until they start to bond. Once they start to bond, it's no longer going to be the same as protons. The symbol is going to be what we use when we're writing chemical equations to represent that element. They're always going to start with a capital letter, and if they have a second letter to them, they will be lowercase. So capital letter, or if they have a second letter, capital, then a lowercase. Underneath that, you see the element's name. Sometimes you notice that the element symbol does not match up with the name. That's because they're using the Latin name when they make the symbol. For example, Fe for iron. At the bottom, you're going to have the atomic mass. The atomic mass is going to be the number of protons and the number of neutrons that that atom has. So we talked about atomic mass units. So we have 6 protons. If we want to find out how many neutrons, we take the atomic mass, subtract those 6 protons, and that tells us how many neutrons we have left. In this case, it would be 6. So it has 6 neutrons, or 6 AMU for that one. Mass is not going to be the same thing as weight, so you do need to know that. For example, if you were at the beach and you were to weigh yourself, you would be 1 weight. And if you were to go to the mountain, weigh yourself again, you would be a different weight. However, you are the same person. You're still made up of the same stuff. So what's happening is the gravitational pull on your body is what's going to change your weight. It doesn't change the particles that you're made up of. So your mass stays the same, but weight can change depending on gravitational pull of your body. With some elements, you're going to have more neutrons than the normal natural found element there. So carbon normally has 6 neutrons, 6 protons, and 6 electrons. That atomic mass, since we only take protons and neutrons, is going to be 12. However, carbon can be found in a form such as carbon-13 and carbon-14. If it's found as carbon-13, it's going to have 7 neutrons found in that nucleus of the atom. If it's carbon-14, you have 8 neutrons. It's still carbon, but it's going to have a different mass to it. So in this case, that mass is going to be heavier. These are referred to as isotopes of that atom or of the element. When we have isotopes, lots of times, it does make the nuclei unstable, and so it spontaneously breaks down. These atoms then become radioactive. They release at a constant rate a tiny high-speed particle that carries a lot of energy. If you're close to that high-speed particle and there's a lot being released, then you could suffer from radioactive damage to your body. There's going to be 25 elements found in the body, but you have what's referred to as the Big Four. Easy way to remember it is CHON, C-H-O-N. With CHON, that's going to be your carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. With these Big Four, these are going to make up 96% of your body. Oxygen being 65%, carbon 18.5%, hydrogen 9.5%, and nitrogen 3%. After that, you have 4% more, which is going to be these 6 other elements: calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, and chlorine. Calcium and phosphorus are going to be important. They help make up things like your bones. Potassium, sodium, and chlorine are going to work together in muscle contractions and nerve impulses. And sulfur will actually help with body metabolism, and it also actually helps fight cancers too. There's going to be trace amounts of elements referred to as trace elements in the body, and they make up about 0.1%, and that's 15 other elements. An atom's electrons are going to determine whether and how that atom is going to bond with other atoms, and it's going to do this by looking at its electron shells, or sometimes what's referred to as the orbitals. So looking here, electron shells are going to move around the nucleus. The closer the shell, the stronger that nucleus has a pull on that shell and on the electrons there. The further away, the less pull that nucleus is going to have on those electrons as they rotate around that nucleus. So the first electron shell can hold up to 2 electrons. Now it might not have 2, but it can hold up to 2. So 2 would make that first shell stable. The second shell is going to have 8 electrons, or hold up to 8 electrons. It doesn't have to have 8, but it can hold up to 8. So here you're looking at oxygen. Notice that its outer shell has 8 spots, but it's only filling 6 of those. So 2 of those spots are going to need to be filled in order for it to be stable. 8 electrons on the outermost shell are referred to as stable electrons. So you need those to make it stable. Lots of times they refer to 8 is great, or the octet rule. You want 8 on the outermost shell. If you look down below at the unstable atoms, you have your hydrogen. Notice it's missing 1. It's going to want to bond with another element to become stable. Beside it, you see helium. It has both of those elements there. It only has 1 electron shell around the nucleus, and so it's stable and does not want to bond. Below you see nitrogen. It has 3 open spots right there in its outermost shell, so it's going to want to bond and fill those 3 to become stable. Neon, however, has 8 on its outermost shell, and so that one is stable. Carbon is going to be one of the most versatile elements that we have. It can make millions of different types of molecules and compounds. Carbon's also going to be found in all living things. So anything that was living or once living does contain carbon. Carbon's also going to have a very unique structure in the way it's able to bond with different things. It has 4 open electron positions there, and these last electrons that go around the outer shell are referred to as valence electrons. So that's going to be important. Valence electrons are the electrons found in the outermost shell. And so those are the ones that are going to do all of the bonding. Looking at the picture, you see carbon dioxide's bonded there. Well, the carbon, of course, wants 4 electrons. Each oxygen has 6 electrons on its outer shell, so it's going to want 2 more each. So notice how that carbon has a double bond between each oxygen there, and so that's going to give it its 4 bonds or 4 electrons that it's going to have. Since they're both going to be gases, that's going to be what's referred to as a covalent bond. So they're going to share those electrons. Below, you'll see glucose and fructose. Those are different types of sugars. They're made up of the same elements in the same amounts. They have the same chemical equation. They're going to be C6H12O6. With these, since they are made up of the same elements, they actually are going to be put together differently, and that's what's going to be the difference in those. But those are also going to have lots of carbons in there, and so they are different types of carbon compounds. Ions are going to be atoms that have a charge. So atoms that bond together, that are going to be metals bonding with nonmetals, are going to be referred to as ionic bonds. And so when they do this, they're either going to gain or lose electrons. In this case, we're taking sodium and chlorine and we're going to bond them together. Sodium only has one electron on its outermost shell, so it's going to donate or give it to chlorine, which only needs one electron. When sodium does this, it's going to get a positive charge because overall it was neutral. Since it's giving away one of its negative charges, it now has a positive charge, so it's a positive 1. Chlorine is gaining an extra negative particle. It was neutral before it bonded, but since it's gaining that negative electron, it's going to be a negative plus, or a negative 1 for this one. So atoms can bond together to form molecules, and they can bond together to form compounds. Energy is going to be stored in bonds that join together to form these atoms. So a group of atoms held together by bonds is going to be referred to as molecules. It usually requires energy to build these bonds, and that glue is going to kind of hold these atoms together. Conversely, when the molecules are broken down, such as when animals, including humans, consume food, they're going to be able to break these bonds, and it's going to release energy. That energy is then going to be able to be used in the human body. So if you think about it, these molecules or these bonds that are being created are going to be kind of like short-term little energy packets. And so when you go in and you metabolize and you break things down, you're going to release this energy. And that energy is then going to be used to perform tasks in your body or perform functions. Or it's going to be taken and made into an ATP molecule. So molecules are going to be products of bonding. There's going to be 3 types of bonds that we're going to talk about. We talk about covalent bonds, ionic bonds, and we're going to talk about hydrogen bonds. Looking at different structures, these are going to be your Lewis structure, your ball and stick model, and your space filling model. Now with these models, they all represent the same thing, a single bond between carbon and 4 hydrogens. However, they're just going to be represented visually in different ways. So notice by looking at each of these, they are going to be the same thing. So with covalent bonds, this is going to be between 2 nonmetals, like we said before. And when they come together, they're actually going to share electrons. So you see 2 hydrogens over here. They only have 1 electron in their outermost shell. And so they're going to want to gain 1 more electron to become stable and happy. So they're going to come together and they're going to share their 1 electron with each other. This is going to give their outer shell 2 total electrons and cause them to become stable. When they do this, this is what helps hold them together. Ionic bonds are going to be bonds between metals and nonmetals. So they're going to give away or take on electrons. And when they do that, they become charged. And so each one of those elements at that point is referred to as an ion. It could be a positive ion if it's giving away electrons, and it can be called a negative ion if it's taking on electrons. And so this, we're going back to our sodium and chlorine. They come together. Sodium gives an electron to chlorine, hooks them together in an ionic bond. When it does this, they're now bonded together, and a poisonous green gas and a metal come together, and they make table salt, something that you put on your French fries. Hydrogen bonds are going to be our 3rd type of bond. These types of bonds are going to be very weak bonds, and it's going to be important in things like DNA because you're going to have to be able to unzip and rezip that DNA strand back together. It needs to come apart during times when it's going to duplicate its DNA and go through mitosis. It also needs to come apart during times when it just needs to copy a certain gene to make, let's say, an enzyme such as lactase in order to break down lactose. Once it copies that gene, makes an mRNA strand, it's going to zip the DNA back together using those hydrogen bonds. It's important for them to be nice, weak bonds. Now, this slide does have an error on it. So let's see, positive there and negative here. You need to switch these. So with this molecule of water, oxygen and hydrogen are going to share electrons. So each hydrogen had 1 electron. It needs 2 to be stable. Oxygen has 6 electrons, needs 8 to be stable. So each hydrogen is going to share its electron with oxygen, and oxygen is going to share an electron with it, and that's how they're going to bond together to make a covalent bond. So water molecules, kind of look like Mickey Mouse, are going to be covalent bonds. Now, when it does this, the oxygen is going to hold on to the electron slightly longer, and so it's going to make it have a slightly negative charge. The hydrogens hold on to the electron a little bit less, and so they're going to become slightly positive charged. This is going to make what we refer to as a polar atom. That's going to be important when we talk about properties of water because it's going to make it have cohesive and adhesive properties. It's going to make it kind of stick together and stick to other things. So looking at the bottom sentence, it should be, this makes that side of the molecule slightly negative for the oxygen, and the hydrogen side slightly positive. And so they flip those. Since this was done by the publisher, I can't go in and edit it. Now with hydrogen bonds, that's going to be where the hydrogen, because it's slightly positive, is going to be attracted to a slightly negative atom. And so here, you're going to see where the slightly positive hydrogen is going to bond with the slightly negative oxygen. And so those blue dots there are going to show a hydrogen bond. This shows in this picture a total of 5 water molecules, and you have a total of 4 hydrogen bonds. Be able to count and know how many hydrogen bonds are there. So talking about our 3 different types of bonds, you need to know which ones are strongest, which ones are in the middle, and which ones are the weakest. So covalent is going to be your strongest bonds. That's between the 2 nonmetals. Ionic bonds are somewhere in the center. And then the hydrogen bonds are going to be your weakest form of bond that we talk about. So molecules are going to have a specific shape. That specific shape is going to give it a specific unique characteristic and quality. So these are referred to as molecular personalities. And so they're going to result from accumulated properties of each atom and their interactions with each other. The important thing with this, for example, it might have the same chemical structure, C6H12O6, but it might react different. It could have a different taste to it. It could have a different smell. So shape and that personality is going to determine its function. So here's some examples. Why does your brain register chocolate as tasting sweet and potato chips as tasting salty? Well, we have our glucose molecule. It has a specific shape, and so it's going to fit into a specific taste receptor. And so that receptor is going to register to the brain that that is a sweet molecule. Salty is going to fit into a particular taste receptor, and that goes to the brain and is going to be registered as salty. So your 4 types, or your 5 types here, are going to be sour, salty, sweet, bitter, and savory. And that savory is actually referred to as umami. Molecular interactions between insects, mating behaviors are going to be seen here. And so that's going to be one that's picked up by the nose and the different chemicals that are out there referred to as pheromones. And so specific pheromones are going to be released by females and males, and determined on what type of pheromones released and how it fits into the receptor determines who's going to be attracted. So the properties of a molecule, such as how the molecule tastes, how it smells, what likelihood it has with bonding with other molecules, is going to depend on its shape and which atoms are linked together and the electrons on those outermost shells. Water is going to have specific properties, and so we have a whole section on water and hydrogen bonding. Because of these hydrogen bonds, it's going to make water cohesive. Back. That cohesiveness gives them kind of a stickiness, and that's going to help them stick together. When it sticks together, certain organisms are going to be able to manipulate that property, and they're going to be able to actually stay on the surface. So this is a water strider as far as the insect. And then we have a basilisk lizard. And both of those are going to take advantage of the cohesive property of water, and they're going to be able to actually stay on top of the water as they move. Water is also going to have a high surface tension. This surface tension is going to allow you to put pressure on that water, and then it's going to move out and create that V shape. So because of those hydrogen bonds that we just looked at in the last couple of pictures, when pressure is applied to that water, it's going to allow them to bend and stretch out and create kind of like a net-like structure. Hydrogen bonds, like we said, make water cohesive, but they're also going to help make it adhesive. And so that's going to help it stick to other things. When working with a graduated cylinder, especially glass, it's going to be more sticky for these water atoms and molecules. So when it actually is poured into that graduated cylinder, it's going to cause a big meniscus. So, say here's our graduated cylinder. It's going to create that curve. When you look at it, you're always going to read the bottom of that curve. Now you need to read it at eye level. So you have to get down to where your eyes are going to be even with the curve. Where it comes up on the sides here, that is going to be because of the adhesive properties of the water molecules. And so it's going to cause it to curve up. You always read the bottom of the curve, and that will be your exact measurement. Now, working with plastic graduated cylinders, you don't get quite as much of a meniscus because it's not going to be as adhesive to the plastic as it was to the glass. So it's going to be more adhesive to the glass. You also have what's referred to as a high heat capacity. You're going to have low density when frozen. It's going to be a universal solvent, so it dissolves most things. And you're going to find it in almost all living things. They're going to be very sensitive to this, and it's going to help with acidic and basic conditions. So first, let's go over cohesion again. When looking at things like trees can grow to such great heights because they have cohesion. This cohesion is where these water properties, like we said, stick together. Since these water molecules stick together, they start to go up through the vessels in the plant, and they pull each other. Water is going to enter through the plant at the root. It helps get pulled upward through those vessels in the root because they stick to each other with these hydrogen bonds. And then underneath the leaf of a tree, you're going to find tiny little holes, and these tiny little holes are called stomata. This is where the water molecule is going to evaporate out of the plant. So it always comes up through the roots, leaves through the leaves. And so with that, it's going to create almost like a suction type, and what they refer to as a capillary action, where it's going to pull it up through. If you've ever had your finger pricked and they use one of those little thin straws, it will suck up into that straw, and that's because of the water molecules in your blood, and it's using what's referred to as capillary action. Okay, so here's your meniscus. And so it shows adhesive properties. It's sticking to the sides there. Water is known for having a high heat capacity. So in this picture, you see a large body of water. What's happening here is heat energy from the sun is going to disrupt some of the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules that you see here. The disrupted bonds are going to be in red, and then the newly formed bonds are going to be in blue. So as it disrupts it, those new hydrogen bonds are going to be formed almost as quickly. Because heat energy from the sun is going to be used up breaking and reforming hydrogen bonds, the water temperature doesn't change as much. So molecules that make up the sand, though, on the other hand, don't have as many hydrogen bonds, so the heat of the sun just increases the temperature of that sand. So if you've ever been to the beach and you start walking across the sand, that's why the sand heats up so quickly, but the water does not. 60% of your body is going to be made up of water, and they say even 60 to 80% of your body, just depending on the person's body composition and how well hydrated they are. So with the high heat capacity, it's going to take a lot of heat and a lot of energy in order to raise the body's temperature, but it also takes a loss of a lot of heat energy in order to lower somebody's temperature. And so that's going to be referred to as your high heat capacity. So why do coastal areas have milder, less variable climates than inland areas? Well, number one, we just saw the disruption of those hydrogen bonds and the reforming, but also over time, it does take a lot of energy in order to raise that temperature. So over the summer, it's absorbing this energy, and finally it does raise that energy up. But once things start to cool off, it releases that energy at a constant rate, which keeps that area or that climate around the beach or around the large body of water fairly warm. And so it takes a while for it to cool off. Water is going to have a low density as a solid, and that's going to be because these hydrogen bonds between the water molecules are going to kind of spread out and then make a crystalline lattice there. And so you see them in this nice lattice formation in the picture. When it does that, it's going to expand the size, but the density is going to be less. So that's why it's going to float on top of the liquid water there. Looking below at the liquid water, you notice how it does not have that nice perfect formation. And so it's also going to be more bendable, more flexible, and it's going to have a higher density. And so that's going to be what's below. Water is going to be a good solvent. And so when placed in water, ionic compounds such as salt are going to be broken down and separated into their separate sodium and chlorine ions. Positively charged sodium ions are going to be attracted to the negatively charged part of the water molecule, while the negatively charged chlorines are going to be attracted to the positively charged side of those. And of course, those are going to be the hydrogens that are the positives. Why don't oceans freeze as easily as freshwater lakes? Well, it's going to be because of the salt. As it dissociates in there, that salt is actually going to lower the freezing temperature, so it's going to have to be a lot cooler in order to freeze, whereas freshwater lakes don't have that salt, which lowers their freezing temperature. So all in all, the hydrogen bonds between water molecules are going to give it several of its important characteristics. We talked about cohesiveness. That's where it sticks to itself. It's adhesive. It sticks to other things. It's going to reduce its density as it changes into a solid. It has the ability to resist temperature changes, and it has broad effectiveness as a solvent in dissolving things. Living systems are going to be highly sensitive to acidic and basic conditions. If you see an atom that ends in OH negative, that is going to be a base. However, if it starts with a hydrogen, then it's going to be acidic, with some exceptions. Water here is not going to be an acid. It's actually going to be neutral. So we have what we refer to as a pH scale. The amount of hydrogen in a solution is a measure of its acidity and is referred to as the pH. Acids go from between 0 to 6. 0 is going to be the most corrosive and the strongest, with 6 being the weakest. So we often refer to as weak acids as 4 to 6 and strong acids from 0 to 3. Bases are going to be from an 8 to a 14. So we refer to weak bases from 8 to 11 and strong bases from 12 to 14. Here's going to give you a visual of some things that you would find at these different pH levels. Battery acid will be at usually around a 0. Stomach acid actually comes in at around a 1 to sometimes a 2. We have soda, Coca-Cola, mostly is going to be around a 3. If you actually get like a cherry Coke, that's slightly more acidic, so it's going to be worse on your teeth. That actually ranks in at around a 2.5. We have beer at 4, or a little above 4. We have coffee at right under 5. You're going to have water at 7. Blood's at about a 7.1, 7.2. You have baking soda at a 9. Ammonia at about 11.5, and bleach at about 12.8, 12.9. When you think of acids, lots of times you think of things like fruits, vegetables, sodas, things that you drink. When you think of bases, lots of times I think of cleaning products. Most soaps are going to be bases. Both of them can be corrosive to the skin, and both of them at strong ends at either the 0 end or the 14 end can be dangerous. So looking specifically at the acids, acids are going to be fluids that have a greater proportion of hydrogen ions to hydroxide ions. So the OH negative is a hydroxide ion. Hydrogen ions are going to be very reactive. Strong acids are corrosive to metals. Acids break down food in your digestive tract, and they're generally going to be sour in taste. Bases are going to have a greater proportion of hydroxide ions to hydrogen ions, and those hydroxides are going to bond with hydrogen ions and help neutralize acids. So if you have an acid spill, you would neutralize it with a base, and that would create a salt and water. If you were to add water to that acid's going to take the hydrogens out of the water and actually make it into a stronger acid. So that can be dangerous. You always have to neutralize it if you have a spill of either side. Strong bases are going to be caustic to your skin. They can be found in many household cleaners, like I said, lots of soaps, lots of detergents, and they're generally going to be bitter to taste and soapy. So, like we said, hydrogen ions, very reactive. They have free-floating protons. They bond with atoms and metals, causing them to corrode. They can donate hydrogens to other chemicals and make them more acidic. And things like stomach acid, which are hydrochloric acid, have a pH of around a 1 or a 2, can actually be up to a 3. They found out the less acidic the stomach acid, for example, if you use a lot of antacids, it could actually cause you to have more allergies. In this stomach acid, it's going to kill most bacteria or microorganisms even that make it to your stomach, and it's going to help break down food and chemicals for you, and then send them on to the small intestine so then you can absorb the nutrients. With bases, they're going to be low in hydrogens and high in hydroxides, and acids are going to be high in hydroxide ions and combined with excessive hydrogens in solutions and neutralize those acids. Examples of different bases that you might have in your house are going to be things like baking soda, seltzer, milk of magnesia, and even dish soap or any type of clothing detergent. Buffers are going to be things that we have in our blood that are going to be able to neutralize things. If, let's say, you've done something or you've eaten a lot of acidic foods, or for some reason you're going to have a low pH in a body where it doesn't belong or it doesn't need a low pH, your body's going to send out something referred to as a buffer in order to change it. So if it's going too acidic, a buffer will be sent out and it will bring the pH back up. If it's too basic, it's going to send a buffer out and it's going to bring that pH back down. So in summary, pH of a fluid is a measure of how acidic or basic a solution is, and it depends on the concentration of dissolved hydrogen ions present. Acids, such as vinegar, can donate protons to other chemicals, while bases, including baking soda, will bind with free protons. So we're going to stop here, and this is where we are going to pick up with our notes with the next video.